Hi guys. So I went to the classroom and look what I found. And I just left you guys hanging. I mean, we all left you hanging when we had to quarantine or socially distance ourselves. And so I thought, rather than going back and rereading the whole story of the Destructiveness Cure, I just kind of fill you in. Remember, the characters are Mr. Phillips, Hearthrug, dear, Mrs. Phillips, and of course, the boy's name was Jeff. Little Jeffy Phillips. And do you remember what Jeffrey did? Is he was famous for taking apart things. Do you remember what he took apart? Well, he took apart Mr. Phillips's lawnmower, and then Mrs. Phillips, he took apart her her milkshake machine, her blender, brand new electric blender, and she was beside herself. And didn't he also take apart the vacuum and some other things? Oh, they're just ruined. Mr. Phillips is flipping his lid, and so he's yelling and ranting all around the place. And so Mrs. Phillips is going to make him a bologna sandwich. I remember they eat the funniest things. So she was going to make him some bologna sandwich and a special milkshake to get him to calm down and forget all about it. So Mrs. Phillips is just beside herself, and she goes to the meeting of the driftwood polishers, the bleachers, and arrangers. And so she, oh gross, remember, she's going to make her famous prune noodle sardine casserole. Surprise. And that's when she remembers that she could call Mrs. PiggleWiggle. So she called Mrs. PiggleWiggle. Mrs. PiggleWiggle was delighted to see Jeff. And she made him all those buckwheat pancakes and 14 sausages. And off Mom went. And he was hanging out at Miss PiggleWiggle's, right? So he hadn't been long. And he told Miss PiggleWiggle how he loved to fix things. So he decided to fix the watering faucet at the trough. And then what else did he fix? So Jeffy took the toolbox and went importantly up to the watering trough, and in no time at all he had broken off the faucet handle so that it was impossible to turn the water either off or on. Then he went on the back porch, took the pump apart, undid the doorbell so it wouldn't ring, dismantled a small churn, loosened the screw eyes that held up the porch swing, and finally took apart the toolbox itself, which was metal and put together with very nice hinges. He was sitting in the sunshine, taking apart his Mickey Mouse wristwatch when Mrs. PiggleWiggle came from the barn. She said, "Well, did you find anything that needed fixing, Jeffy?" Oh, yeah. So then Mrs. PiggleWiggle says, "Oh, mercy." Walking over, she sees that the pump is broken, but all the animals need to be watered. So she says, "Well, gosh, in that case, I guess you'll just have to carry water from the spring. It's up behind the house. You go past the woodshed and follow that little trail until you get to it. Here, you'd better take 2 buckets," she said. And she handed him 2 12-quart milk buckets. So off he goes. Well, do you remember? He started up the path. It was very narrow and overgrown with blackberries and nettles. So he's getting poked and pinched and prodded, and it was slippery, and there were mosquitoes, and he had a bucket in each hand, so he couldn't pack He couldn't slap the mosquitoes that were swarming around him. He found that water is the heaviest, sloppiest, hardest thing in the world to carry, and what was worse, Trotsky alone could drink a bucket with one slurp. So poor Jeffy's packing buckets, and then he had an idea. Ho, ho, he had it. He would hitch Trotsky to the cart and drive back and forth from the spring. Gosh, with Trotsky, he could carry 4 10-gallon milk cans of water at a time. This would be so easy. So, there he goes. He's got an idea. So he lugged the cart across the barnyard, past the house and up to the spring. Do you guys remember this? It was very, very hard work. And when he finally got it up to the spring, he was so hot he had to lie down and slap cold water on his forehead. After he had cooled off, he filled the 4 buckets, loaded them in the cart, and started home. Pulling the cart with the 4 buckets of water in it was quite a job, even for a husky 9-year-old. Now wait, I think... So, do you remember he didn't hitch Trotsky to it because he had taken apart Trotsky's harness. So then he's pulling the cart himself. Oh, it's this darn path, Jeffy kept saying to himself as he pushed and pulled and jounced along. As soon as I get to Miss PiggleWiggle's yard, it'll be easy as pie. When he finally got to Mrs. PiggleWiggle's yard, the left wheel came off the cart. The cart tipped over and all the water spilled. Jeffy was so mad he kicked the wagon wheel as hard as he could, which was a mistake because he only had on his tennis shoes. Ouch, he shrieked. Ouch, my toe is broken. Help, help, the agony. Oh my gosh. So does that refresh your brain? Okay, so Miss PiggleWiggle dolls him up. She made Jeffy lie in the hammock and gave him 6 large, fresh ginger cookies and a glass of lemonade for medicine. He said he felt much better right away. As soon as she finished the peanuts, Mrs. PiggleWiggle called up Mr. Larson and asked him if he had a spare faucet or perhaps could fix her pump. He said he'd be right over. Mrs. PiggleWiggle met him at the barn and talked to him for quite a while in a low voice. And then he came up, lifted Jeffy out of the hammock, and carried him down to the watering trough, set him down on his good foot, and said, "Now, son, I'll tell you what to do, but you're going to fix this water faucet. After all, you were strong enough to take it apart, so you should be smart enough to put it back together. Now, first you take this Stilson wrench." When Jeffy had fixed the faucet and had filled the watering trough, Mr. Larson carried him up to the porch and sat him on the bench by the pump. "Now, son," he said, "you're going to learn how to fix a pump." By the time he had taught Jeffy how to fix the pump, Mr. Larson had to go home and milk. He said, "It's all right, though. I don't think you'll need me for anything else, Mrs. PiggleWiggle. This young feller's pretty handy with tools." "Thanks, Mr. Larson," said Jeffy, scratching a big mosquito bite on his leg. "Thanks ever so much for showing me how to fix the faucet and the pump." "That's all right, Jeffy," said Mr. Larson. "Someday you can come over and help me with my tractor." "As soon as my toe gets well," said Jeffy, "I'll ride Trotsky over." Then he remembered the bridle, and his face turned brick red. He said, "Say, Mrs. PiggleWiggle, are there any instructions about putting bridles together? I mean, buckling the right pieces to the right pieces?" Mrs. PiggleWiggle laughed, and she said, "I guess there are, Jeffy, but I don't happen to have any. However, after supper, I'll bring the bridle up here and show you how to put it all back together." While Mrs. PiggleWiggle was milking, Jeffy limped over to the steps, sat down, and put the toolbox back. Then He put all the tools neatly away. He felt somehow better. Then he remembered the churn, and he fixed that. He was working on the doorbell when Mrs. PiggleWiggle called him to supper. After supper, she showed him how to fix the bridle, and then she made him soak his toe and go to bed. He was very tired, and his bed with its cool white sheets and blue and white patchwork quilt looked so inviting he completely forgot about his toe and made a great big leap from the rug right into the middle. There was a terrible crash, and he was laying squashed down between the springs and the mattress. "What happened? Are you hurt?" asked Mrs. PiggleWiggle as she helped him out. "I'm all right," Jeffy said sheepishly. "It's just that I guess I sort of forgot that I sort of loosened all the screws on the bed this morning. I mean, I was testing out the screwdriver on my good pocket knife to see if it was any good." "Well, was it?" asked Miss PiggleWiggle, laughing. "I guess so," said Jeffy. We're going to stop here, and I'll read more later.